There's a strange kind of silence that lives in airport terminals after 11 p.m. A hush not born of peace but of resignation. Cancellations echo off metal beams like broken promises, and travelers slump into rigid seats, clutching coffee cups like lifelines. I sat in one of those chairs, under the flickering fluorescent lights of Gate 47, with a crossword book in my lap and the low hum of the vending machine for company. At 58, I had mastered the art of waiting. For delayed flights, for mechanical parts, for my life to feel like something more than maintenance logs and polite small talk. I had flown all over the world without ever leaving the ground. 37 years as an aircraft mechanic will do that to you, long hours with engines and rivets, torque wrenches and turbine blades. The only thing I had ever really committed to was making sure other people's dreams could take off safely. Mine had long been grounded. A divorce, a grown daughter who lived 3 time zones away, and a quiet workshop I returned to each evening with the comforting ache of age in my joints. It wasn't a bad life. But it certainly wasn't the one I'd imagined in my 20s. "Mind if I peek at your puzzle?" came a voice beside me, breaking through the low murmur of delayed announcements and groaning rolling suitcases. I glanced up, my pen paused mid-square. A woman stood there, maybe 35 at most, with strands of dark brown hair slipping from a messy ponytail and soot-smudged fingers curled around the strap of a canvas duffel. Her eyes, green like wet leaves, held the kind of curiosity that could rearrange weathered hearts if you weren't careful. "Be my guest," I said, gesturing to the empty seat beside me. "Though I'll warn you, I'm pretty good at these." She sat down with a sigh that sounded like she'd been carrying the weight of fire itself. "Lauren Lopez," she said, offering a hand that smelled faintly of smoke and sea salt. "And I'm pretty good at solving problems." There was something in the tilt of her smile that made me forget the answer to 17 across. I took her hand, strong and calloused, warm even in the chilly terminal air. "Alexandra Ward," I replied. "Alex, if you like." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "No, Alexandra suits you, has strength." I wasn't used to people seeing me like that. Most people looked right through me, especially after the age of 50. But Lauren's gaze didn't flicker. She leaned forward to scan the puzzle, and her shoulder brushed mine. I caught the scent of something floral beneath the smoke, unexpected, soft, almost stubborn. 14 down, she said suddenly. "Brave soul who fights fires." "Hero?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She nodded. "Takes one to know one." "You fight fires?" "Oil rigs, refineries, anywhere they think they've got it under control until they don't." I whistled under my breath. "Sounds like chaos." She shrugged like she was talking about her grocery list. "It's control in chaos." And just like that, the conversation stretched its wings. Over the next 4 hours, we moved through 3 crossword puzzles and more of our lives than I'd shared with anyone in years. She told me about her father, who died in a refinery explosion when she was 13, and how she'd spent her life walking into fire to understand the thing that took him. I talked about my daughter, my failed marriage, my love for machines that never lied. "Aircraft mechanic, huh?" she said, her fingers tracing the edge of the crossword book. "What do they say to you? The planes, I mean." I laughed softly. "They don't talk, but they hum when they're happy." She leaned closer. "And how do you make them happy?" "You listen." That seemed to please her. She leaned back and crossed her legs, her boots swinging lightly in the air. "I like women who know how to listen." Something in her tone made the air shift between us. The storm outside pounded harder, rain streaking across the tall glass windows like a warning or a dare. The terminal lights flickered, and the announcements stalled in static. Lauren didn't look away from me, though. Her eyes held steady like she was watching a fuse burn toward something inevitable. 23 across, she said after a pause. "Connection between 2 people, 7 letters." I frowned at the clue, tapping my pen against the edge of the book. "Chemistry," she said softly. The word fit, in more ways than one. I wrote it in without another word. Our shoulders touched again, and neither of us moved. By the time we walked toward our gates, both of us looked reluctant. She stopped near the magazine stand, her thumb brushing over the plastic wrapping of a travel journal. "If I asked for your number in crossword format, would that be too cheesy?" The laugh that escaped my throat surprised me. I hadn't laughed like that in months. "Try me." She smiled, 10 digits that allow connection across distances. I recited my number slowly. She typed it into her phone with a focused expression like she was defusing a bomb. As she turned to go, she looked back once. "You smell like motor oil and lavender. You smell like smoke and recklessness." "Perfect match," she said, and disappeared around the corner. 3 days passed. I didn't expect her to call. I told myself women like Lauren flirted with the world but never lingered in one place long enough to unpack their stories. So when my phone buzzed against my workbench, I nearly dropped the wrench in my hand. "So I've been thinking about that crossword clue," she said when I answered. "Want to meet for coffee and solve some more answers?" I said yes before I even looked at my schedule. She picked a quiet cafe by the marina, nothing fancy, just salt air, sun-bleached tables, and the faint sound of gulls above. She was already there when I arrived, arms folded on the table, sunglasses resting on her head like she just stepped out of a movie about stubborn women who don't know how to quit. "You clean up nice," she said as I approached. "This is as cleaned up as I get," I replied, glancing down at my ironed khakis and simple blouse. "I don't do fancy." "Good, neither do I." She pulled out my chair without hesitation, and something in my chest gave way like old metal under heat. We talked for hours, about the weight of expectation, about being women in fields that demanded you prove your worth twice before being taken half as seriously, about exhaustion and loneliness, and how silence could stretch like a tightrope between who you are and who the world tells you to be. After lunch, she stood and held out her hand. "Walk with me." The pier creaked beneath our steps, waves crashing beneath us like forgotten thunder. The sun began its slow descent, casting gold across the horizon. I paused at the railing, heart doing something unfamiliar and inconvenient. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Are you seeing anyone?" I shook my head. "Divorced 3 years, you." She looked away, watching a pelican dive into the water. "No, I don't usually do this." "Do what?" "This," she said, motioning between us. "Ask women out." The silence between us went still, but not cold. "Lauren," I said slowly, I've never been with a woman." Her smile didn't falter. "That doesn't scare me." I looked at her then, really looked. At the soot under her nails, the strength in her arms, the softness around her eyes. Something old inside me cracked open. "It doesn't scare me either," I whispered. She reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. The ocean whispered beneath us, waves curling against the wooden pylons of the pier like it was trying to eavesdrop on the moment stretching between us. Her hand in mine felt heavier than I expected, not in weight, but in meaning. Calloused fingers, firm grip, no hesitation. It was the touch of someone who knew danger and walked toward it anyway. My life until then had been a series of calculated choices, of mechanical precision and routine, a world where every bolt had its torque value, every screw its proper place. And yet this single moment, this simple human contact, was the most uncertain and alive I had felt in years. I didn't speak as we walked back along the pier. Neither did she. There was no need. Something had already been spoken between us, something that couldn't be reduced to small talk or clever clues in a crossword. When we reached the parking lot, I hesitated beside my car, hand on the door handle, and turned to face her. Her face was quiet, unreadable. The wind lifted strands of her hair, and she let them dance without brushing them away. She didn't pressure. Didn't ask for more than what I had already offered. She simply waited, present, grounded, as if she understood the weight of being given trust from someone who'd kept herself locked away for decades. "Would you like to come by the hangar sometime?" I asked suddenly, surprising even myself. "Where I work." Her eyebrows lifted with a grin. "Only if you'll let me bring food. Mechanics deserve to eat something other than stale coffee and vending machine snacks." I laughed before I could stop myself. "Deal. Just don't spill pad thai on a turbine compressor." "Wouldn't dream of it," she winked, stepping back slowly toward her truck. "I'll text you." And she did. That night and the next and the one after that. Never too much. Never invasive. Just quiet messages at strange times, photos of oil-soaked boots, blurry sunsets from rigged decks, a crossword clue at 2:12 a.m. that simply read, 9-letter word for something you didn't know you needed until you had it. The answer came to me slowly, as I lay in bed with the light off and the sound of ceiling fans ticking softly overhead. Companion. 3 days later, Lauren walked into my hangar like she belonged there. She wore a worn leather jacket, dark jeans, and a white tank top smudged with something that might have been ash or old grease. She carried 2 steaming takeout boxes and a reusable cup filled with something that smelled suspiciously like fresh chai. "You're late," I said, trying to keep my voice dry, but the smile broke through anyway. "Traffic," she lied, "and I couldn't find the right kind of spring rolls." "You came here for spring rolls." "I came here for you." The word stopped me cold, not in fear, in awe. No one had said that to me in a very long time, not my ex-husband, not even my daughter. I had always been an obligation, a support structure, a steady background note in other people's songs. But Lauren's eyes didn't see through me. They saw me. She set the food down on my workbench, sliding a few tools aside with the ease of someone who respected workspaces. "What are you working on?" "Piper Cherokee, she's old. Not forgotten, just neglected." "Sounds familiar," she murmured. And just like that, we were elbow-deep in an engine. She asked intelligent questions, didn't flinch at the smell of oil or the sharp edges of torn wiring insulation. She listened when I explained, not just to my words, but to the spaces between them. At one point, she reached over me to grab a socket wrench, and her chest brushed against my arm. Neither of us moved. The silence didn't hum with awkwardness. It pulsed with something else: permission, possibility, the electricity of presence. "I want to show you something tomorrow," she said suddenly, standing and wiping her hands on a rag. "What?" "My world. There's a controlled burn training at the refinery. It's safe, I promise, but I want you to see it, what I do, who I am." I blinked, stunned by the invitation. She didn't say it like a test or a challenge. She said it like a gift. "I'll be there," I answered without hesitation. The next afternoon, the world smelled like diesel and fear. I stood behind safety barriers, wearing borrowed goggles and a hard hat far too big for my head. Across the yard, metal towers loomed like monsters with hollow throats. Flames licked the sky as Lauren's team conducted the burn. She moved through the chaos with terrifying grace, directing, shouting, adjusting pressure valves, her body a symphony of competence and fire. Watching her was like witnessing a different element of the universe. Raw, beautiful, necessary. "She's one of the best," a man beside me said. "Keeps her crew alive, doesn't blink." And I believed him, because I watched her not just with admiration, but with fear, real fear. That one misstep could take her from this world. That courage had a cost, and it might one day be too high. When the flames died and the yard turned to smoke and shadows, she found me by the fence. Her cheeks were flushed, her uniform drenched in sweat, soot streaked across her jaw like war paint. "What'd you think?" she asked, breathless. "I think I'm going to need something stronger than spring rolls next time," I managed to say, and she laughed, throwing her head back in the way people do when they are completely unafraid of joy. That night we talked until nearly midnight again. She told me about her brothers, 4 of them, all firefighters, and how she had to learn early to be louder, tougher, faster to earn her place. She told me about the night her father died, how the fire captain knocked on the door and wouldn't meet her mother's eyes. She talked about silence in the months after, and how she'd fallen in love with flames not because they were dangerous, but because they were honest. "I know I don't fit," she said. "Not in most people's ideas of life. I'm always one phone call from a disaster. I sleep light. I work long. I miss holidays." "You fit here," I said quietly. "Here." I tapped my chest, "with me." She didn't say anything right away. Just looked at me with an expression I'd never had directed at me before, like I was the fire, and she was the one brave enough to step closer. She came over 2 nights later with her boots still covered in dry mud and a bottle of red wine I suspect she'd stolen from her captain's locker. We sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but full, like a warm room waiting for music. At one point, she stood up to refill her glass and paused behind me at the sink. Her hands settled on my hips, tentative but certain. "Alexandra," she said softly, and the way she said my name sent something trembling through me. I turned to face her, and she didn't move away. Her eyes searched mine for doubt, for fear, for retreat, but I had none to give her. She stepped forward, pinning me gently against the counter, her hands firm but patient. "Have you ever been with a woman?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," I said, "but I've thought about it more times than I've ever said out loud." Her lips didn't press into mine immediately. She gave me space, a choice, and in that space I chose her. Our kiss wasn't the spark that started the fire. It was the flame that had been burning slowly beneath all our conversations, all our sideways glances and hesitant jokes. It was soft. It was respectful. It was real. And when it ended, I wasn't someone else. I was more myself than I had been in years. She leaned her forehead against mine and smiled. You didn't flinch. I don't flinch from truth, I whispered. Not anymore. That night she didn't stay over. She kissed me once more on the cheek, whispered goodnight, and walked out with a promise to come back. And she did. Again and again. But with every return, I knew something deeper was shifting in me. Something that couldn't be undone. You said, continue with 3-part more unique and lengthy. And also you make sure do not write in small line or small paragraph, please write in paragraph, and not in small lines. For the next few weeks, life began to shift in ways so subtle and so profound that I didn't notice it happening until one evening when I walked into my kitchen and found it changed. Not by new furniture or decoration, but by the memory of her hands on my hips, the soft warmth of her breath on my cheek. It was like her presence lingered there, woven into the air and the way I moved through the room, as though she had left a fingerprint on my world without meaning to. Every morning at work felt different too. The engine sounded the same, the hangar smelled the same, but something in me hummed with a quiet energy I hadn't felt in decades. For the first time in years, I caught myself humming along to the aircraft's rhythm instead of simply listening. Even my coworkers noticed. You look different, one of the younger mechanics said, wiping grease off his hands. Did you win the lottery or something? I just shook my head and said no. But inside, it felt like something more valuable than a lottery ticket had unexpectedly landed in my life. Lauren and I developed a rhythm, one not bound by rules or labels or expectations, but by the ease of two people who found solace in each other's presence. Some evenings she came to my hangar when her shift ended, her boots leaving dusty prints on the concrete floor as she crossed the space with exhaustion in her shoulders and determination in her stride. I'd hand her a cold drink or a spare rag, and she'd ask to watch me work. I didn't understand it at first, why someone who fought fire and chaos all day would want to sit in silence beside a humming engine. But one evening she admitted that the symphony of tools, the metallic fragrance of repair, the measured patience of my hands brought her a kind of peace she rarely found anywhere else. It feels safe here, she said quietly, leaning her hip against the workbench. Like nothing can explode if I'm standing next to you. Her words stunned me not because they were dramatic, but because they were simple and true in a way that went straight through the ribs. Firefighters didn't admit fear. They lived beyond it, yet around me she allowed herself to be soft. But connection, real connection, always brings shadows with it, and soon enough the first one appeared. My daughter, Rebecca, called one afternoon while I was tightening a bolt on the Cessna's right wing. The phone buzzed in my pocket, and the moment I saw her name, my heart tightened with guilt. I answered quickly, brushing my hands off on my coveralls. She told me she was planning to visit for a weekend, something she hadn't done in over a year, and though I was thrilled, a tightness formed in my chest the moment she asked. So what's new with you? I froze, not because I was ashamed of the truth, but because I realized I didn't yet know how to say it out loud. How did one explain to a grown daughter that her mother, her divorced, practical, never messy mother, had unexpectedly discovered an entirely new corner of her heart at nearly 60? I dodged the question. Oh, nothing much, I said, hating myself for the lie. Just work. She didn't press, but I did. For the rest of the day, I pressed myself into anxiety. Lauren sensed the shift the moment she walked into the hangar that evening. She stopped mid-step, reading the tension in my shoulders like smoke patterns. What's wrong? She asked gently, stepping closer. I told her about Rebecca's upcoming visit, trying to keep my voice steady even though my insides felt like a tangled mess of fear and longing. I want to tell her about us, I confessed. But I don't know how. I don't know what this is yet, what it's becoming, and I don't want to confuse her, or you. Lauren didn't flinch or get defensive. Instead, she reached out, brushing her knuckles against my forearm, a gesture so tender it nearly brought tears to my eyes. Alexandra, she said softly, we're figuring this out together. There's no rush. You can tell her when you're ready. Her steadiness was a balm, soothing the panic before it could take hold. You don't owe me secrets, not yet, but you owe yourself space to feel what you feel without apologizing for it. After work, we walked to my car, the air warm with twilight. She took my hand, not in a claiming way, but in a grounding one, and the moment our fingers intertwined, I felt the weight of the day lift from my shoulders. We stood like that, leaning against the hood, the smell of metal and cut grass lingering in the breeze, until she finally said, "Can I share something with you now?" And I nodded. She told me about an accident from years ago, one she'd never discussed with anyone outside her crew. A malfunctioning valve, a sudden burst of flame the moment she thought she wouldn't make it out alive. She spoke quietly about the fear, the helplessness, the scars she carried on her ribs, both visible and invisible. I listened as she described waking in a hospital bed and realizing how fragile life actually was, how each shift could be the last. "That's why I don't waste time," she said softly. "Why I ask for what I want, why I don't wait for someday. Someday isn't promised, not for people like me." Her vulnerability cracked something open inside me, a part of myself I had spent years ignoring, years protecting. I reached out and lifted the hem of her shirt slightly, just enough to see the faint ridges of old burns along her side. They weren't ugly. They were stories written into skin. I traced them gently, feeling her breath catch, not from pain but from the intimacy of being seen, not as a hero, not as a force of nature, but as a human being who had survived battles no one else would ever fully understand. "These don't scare me," I whispered. "They move me." Her cheeks flushed with something that looked like gratitude, maybe even relief. And then she leaned her forehead against mine, and we stood in the fading light, our shadows stretching long and intertwined across the pavement. The next day, she invited me to meet her crew, not in an official capacity, not during a fire operation, but during their downtime behind the station. I wasn't sure what to expect. I'd spent most of my life around men in coveralls, mechanics who spoke with half sentences and inside jokes, but firefighters were another world entirely. Still, I went, because she asked. When I arrived, they were sitting around a weathered picnic table outside the station, drinking iced tea from mismatched mugs and laughing about something that had clearly just happened on the job. Lauren introduced me without fanfare. "This is Alexandra," she said simply, and every face at the table softened with curiosity and respect. No one stared. No one made comments. No one questioned who I was or why I was there. They accepted me seamlessly, like I was already part of her orbit. And I realized then that Lauren surrounded herself with people who valued loyalty and heart more than anything else. One of them, her captain, a tall man with gray in his beard, pulled me aside later. "You're good for her," he said quietly. "I can see it." His words struck me unexpectedly, a mix of pride and fear swelling in my chest. "She's strong," he continued, "but she carries more weight than she lets on. She needs someone who understands her storms, someone steady." I didn't know how to respond, because I didn't know yet if I was steady enough for someone like her, but I wanted to try. That alone terrified me, because wanting something, wanting someone, was the beginning of risk. A week later, life offered that reminder brutally and suddenly. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished closing the hangar when my phone buzzed with a message from Lauren. It was short, too short. "Emergency call, big spill, containment failed, might be long night, stay up for me." My blood turned cold. I tried not to panic, tried to remember that this was her job, that she had done this 1,000 times, that she was trained for disaster and lived for pressure. But knowing didn't ease the shaking in my hands. Hours passed. I paced my living room, stared out the window, tried to distract myself with the quiet hum of late-night television, but nothing worked. Fear curled inside me like a fist. It was nearly 3 in the morning when someone knocked on my door. My stomach dropped. I opened it so fast I nearly stumbled, and there she was standing under the porch light, drenched in sweat and soot, her face streaked with exhaustion. She didn't speak before I pulled her inside, my hands shaking as I touched her shoulders, her face, her arms, needing to know she was whole, that she was here, that nothing had been taken from her. She didn't resist. She stood still and let me examine her, her eyes soft with understanding. "I'm okay," she whispered. "It was bad, but I'm okay." The relief that washed over me was so intense it felt like grief. My knees nearly buckled, and she caught me by the waist, pulling me against her chest. I could feel her heartbeat, steady and real. I buried my face against her shoulder, inhaling the scent of smoke that clung to her clothes. "You scared me," I whispered into her collar. "I know," she whispered back. "I'm sorry." And then she held me, really held me, arms wrapped tight around my back, chin resting lightly on the top of my head, her breath warm against my hair. It was the kind of embrace that told a story all on its own, a story of two people who had lived separate lives for decades and were now learning how to intertwine them slowly, carefully, with every breath and every touch. That night she fell asleep on my couch, her head on my lap, her hand curled around mine. I didn't move for hours. I watched the rise and fall of her chest, memorizing the pattern like it was a language I needed to learn. Something changed in me then, not because of fear, but because of recognition. I realized that loving someone like her wasn't a quiet affair. It wasn't safe. It wasn't predictable. It was raw, terrifying, honest. And I realized, with a kind of trembling clarity, that this was the first time in my life I didn't want safe. I wanted real. I wanted her. When dawn broke, the living room bathed in pink gold light, she stirred and blinked up at me, her eyes soft and sleepy. "You didn't sleep," she murmured. "I was watching you," I whispered. "Just making sure." She smiled, slow, tired, beautiful, and squeezed my hand. Alexandra, she said softly, I think I'm falling for you. My breath caught because I already knew. I had felt it long before she said the words. But hearing them, hearing her say them in the quiet of morning, made everything inside me shift into place. And yet beneath the warmth, something else hovered, a shadow I couldn't name, a tension forming quietly in the world outside us. Something was coming, something that would test us. I could sense it in the way the air felt heavy, in the way her phone buzzed even before she'd fully woken up, in the way she frowned at the screen. Life, I knew, never allowed peace to linger without interruption. Something was on the horizon, and neither of us was ready for it. It was strange, the way peace could feel both tender and temporary, like a sunrise you knew would burn off into another difficult day. In the weeks that followed Lauren's near-sleepless emergency shift and that early morning confession, I think I'm falling for you. Our days took on a rhythm that almost felt ordinary, as though the world had finally decided to give us a pocket of stillness. We spent evenings tangled in conversation and silences that didn't need filling, sharing music, swapping stories, solving crossword puzzles like old lovers in disguise. Some nights she would fall asleep with her head in my lap, soot still clinging to her skin, and I would find myself watching her, memorizing the shape of her rest. I'd trace her knuckles with the tip of my finger, as if afraid time might erase this miracle that had somehow stumbled into my life in a storm-delayed airport terminal. And yet beneath that calm, I could feel something shifting, like the quiet before pressure fractures steel. Not between us, no, between us, something warm and strong was still blooming, still finding its voice. But outside us, in the world that hadn't been asked for permission, pressure was building. Rebecca, my daughter, arrived earlier than planned. I stood waiting at the airport, my hands curled nervously around the leather handle of my purse, watching her walk down the escalator with the same stride her father used to have when he was trying to look like he had it all figured out. She was 31 now, headstrong, beautiful, smart, and entirely unprepared for the truth I had not yet told her. We hugged awkwardly at first. She smelled like lemongrass and city rain. The drive home was filled with light updates, her job, her new apartment, the coworker she couldn't stand. I nodded, smiled, asked follow-up questions, and yet inside the truth twisted like wires behind drywall, waiting for a spark. That evening, as we sat in the kitchen and drank tea in the dull glow of the pendant light above the table, she asked it. Mom, are you seeing someone? The air in the room dropped a few degrees. I stared at her across the rim of my mug, unsure if she knew already or if this was truly curiosity. Maybe it was my hesitation that gave it away. Maybe she saw the color rise to my cheeks or the flicker of memory flash across my eyes. You are, she said slowly, a smile forming, then fading when I didn't answer right away. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know how, I admitted. Is it serious? Yes. What's his name? And there it was, the moment I had rehearsed 100 times, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling while Lauren breathed beside me in sleep. My heart thudded painfully as I set the mug down and said, quietly but clearly, her name is Lauren. Silence, not angry, not explosive, just silence. She blinked slowly, digesting the sentence like a bitter pill. Her fingers curled around the handle of her teacup, then released it. I didn't know you were. Neither did I said, voice steady. Not really, or maybe I did and I just buried it under decades of expectations. But this, with her, it's the most honest thing I've ever felt. Her eyes narrowed, but not with judgment, with confusion, with something that looked like betrayal. Why now? Because I finally stopped living the life everyone told me I should, and started listening to the one that was quietly waiting inside me. She stood up, paced to the window. I didn't see this coming. Neither did I, but it's real, Rebecca, and I need you to understand that. I don't know if I can. Her words sliced deeper than I expected, but I nodded, because I had lived long enough to know that love, especially love that arrives unexpectedly, asks not for approval but for patience. You don't have to understand it right away, I said softly, but I'm still your mother, that hasn't changed. She left early the next morning, said something about a meeting. I didn't stop her. I didn't cry. Not until the door closed and her footsteps faded down the walk. And when I did cry, it wasn't just for her. It was for all the years I had lost playing the role of someone I wasn't sure ever belonged to me in the first place. Lauren came by that afternoon. I hadn't texted her. Somehow she just knew. She walked into the hangar where I was tightening a bolt that didn't need tightening, her jacket tossed over one shoulder, hair pulled back tight, and eyes that immediately found mine across the space. She didn't take it well, she said, not a question. I shook my head. She was quiet, cold, confused. And you? Fractured but not broken. Lauren crossed the room slowly, placed her hands gently on either side of my face, and kissed my forehead. That's because you're stronger than you think. That night we sat on the rooftop of her apartment building, a bottle of wine between us and the sky painted in the soft bruises of twilight. She leaned against me, her shoulder warm, her breath steady. You ever think about what it means to start over this late in life? I asked. All the time, she murmured. But maybe we're not starting over. Maybe we're just finally starting. I looked at her then, really looked at her, at the woman who had walked out of smoke and engines and found me in my stillness, a spark in the ash of a life I thought was already written. And I realized something terrifying and beautiful all at once. I was falling in love with her, not in a romantic fantasy way, in a raw, grounded, terrifyingly real way. And I hadn't even told her yet. But before I could gather the courage to say it, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression shifted. A tension crept into her spine. I knew that posture, something was wrong. Spill at the North facility, she said, standing. Tanker fire, they're asking all crews in. She was already moving, grabbing her keys, her gear bag slung over one shoulder. I followed her to the door, heart pounding. Lauren, I said, reaching for her wrist. She turned. I haven't said it yet, but I need you to come back. She froze, eyes locked on mine, then nodded once. I will. And then she was gone into the night, toward the flames that had both shaped and haunted her life. I stood there for a long time, alone on her rooftop, the wind lifting my hair, my heart suspended in the space she had just left behind. That night I didn't sleep. That night I learned what it really meant to love someone who lived on the edge of danger. That night I waited, for a siren that didn't sound, for a call that didn't come. And as the sky began to brighten with the earliest whisper of dawn, I whispered into the silence, "Please come back to me." Because I hadn't just fallen for her. I had built a new life around the hope that she would always return. Dawn arrived without her. The sky bled into soft blues and purples, stretching over the quiet city as if trying to lull the world back into a sense of safety. But I couldn't be lulled. I sat in the kitchen with my hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long gone cold, my eyes fixed on the door like it owed me answers. I tried to distract myself, tinkered with a rusted carburetor on the table, reorganized my toolkit, folded the dish towels 3 times, but my thoughts returned again and again to Lauren, to the weight of her gear bag swinging over her shoulder, to the strain in her voice when she said, "Tanker fire," to the words I said too late. "I need you to come back." I played them over like a song stuck on repeat, wondering if they had settled into her heart or if they had been lost beneath the sirens. By 9 a.m., I was pacing. By 10, I was calling her phone every 10 minutes, straight to voicemail. I didn't want to be the person who panicked. I had lived through mechanical emergencies, through planes landing sideways in wind tunnels, through losing my husband without warning. I knew how to breathe through fear. But love, this kind of love, made fear something else entirely. It made it personal, and raw, and unbearable. I sat in the middle of my living room floor, surrounded by silence, and realized that love wasn't the rush of first kisses or soft smiles in a hangar. It was this, the waiting, the praying, the trembling hope that someone would simply survive. The call came just after noon, a number I didn't recognize. I answered with a voice I barely recognized as my own. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Captain Morales, shift lead for Lauren's unit. My heart seized before she even said the words. "She's okay," Morales said quickly. "She's in the hospital, smoke inhalation, bruised ribs, concussion, but she's stable. She's asking for you." The world blurred at the edges. I didn't even remember grabbing my keys or driving across the bridge. All I remember is how the hospital smelled, sterile and overbright and humming with machines, and how my chest tightened when I saw her through the doorway, lying in that narrow bed with wires taped to her skin, her lips split, her left eye swollen, and yet still her. She turned her head slowly when I stepped inside, and despite everything, the pain etched across her face, the quiet hiss of oxygen beside her, she smiled. That same crooked, maddening, beautiful smile. "Took you long enough," she rasped. I didn't say anything. I just walked to the side of her bed, sat down, and pressed my forehead gently against her arm, breathing in the remnants of smoke and sweat and something floral beneath it all. I wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Not yet. She reached up and tangled her fingers in mine, wincing slightly as she moved. "I told you I'd come back," she whispered. Don't joke about that, I said, my voice breaking. Not today. Her thumb traced across my knuckles. I had to. There were 2 new guys on the hose line. I couldn't leave them alone. They panicked. I had to go back for them. And nearly died, I snapped, the fear finally pouring through the cracks. Lauren, you could have, my throat closed. I thought I lost you. But you didn't, she said, softer now. I'm here, look at me, I'm here. I looked, and for the first time I saw not the woman who had captured my heart in a terminal or challenged me with crossword clues or kissed me so tenderly it changed everything I thought I knew. I saw the woman who ran toward death to keep others safe. The woman who could be taken from me at any moment by a job she refused to abandon. And I realized I didn't just love her. I needed her. And that terrified me. I stayed at the hospital for 3 days. Slept in the corner chair with a blanket draped over my lap, my phone off. The outside world dimmed to nothing but the rhythm of her breathing and the soft shuffle of nurses' feet. Rebecca called. I didn't answer. My team at the hangar sent updates. I didn't read them. Nothing mattered except the slow return of color to Lauren's face and the moments when she woke just long enough to squeeze my hand and remind me she was still fighting her way back. On the 3rd night, she woke fully, eyes clear and voice stronger. I was watching the rain trail down the window when she spoke. You said you needed me to come back, she said softly. Why? I turned, met her gaze. Because I'm in love with you. The words didn't startle her. She just blinked once, then again, as if confirming the world hadn't shifted beneath her feet. Then she reached out her hand, palm up. I took it. I was hoping you'd say that, she said, smiling through the bruises. Because I've been in love with you since the moment you corrected my crossword clue at gate 47. We laughed, we cried, we stayed quiet, we kissed as gently as her cracked lips would allow. And somewhere in the space between her heartbeat and mine, I stopped waiting for permission to feel. But life in its cruel honesty does not offer stillness for long. 2 days after she was discharged, her department called with news, another deployment, this time for 2 weeks, assisting with a refinery explosion in another state. She didn't want to go. I saw it in the way she lingered at the foot of my bed, uniform half-zipped, gear bag untouched. But she had made promises, and I understood. Her integrity was one of the very reasons I loved her. You don't have to say anything, she said, adjusting the strap across her chest. Just tell me you'll still be here when I get back. I will, I said, crossing the room to kiss her. But come back whole, okay? Come back safe. I always try, she said, her lips brushing against mine. But it means more now. And then she was gone again. This time I didn't cry. I went to work. I rebuilt the Piper engine. I called Rebecca and asked if she'd come for dinner. I stared at the empty space in my bed and remembered the rise and fall of her breath. I told myself she'd be back because that's what people in love do. They wait, they believe, they stay. But one night, while sitting on the rooftop where we once shared wine and dreams, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. And when I answered, everything inside me froze. The voice on the phone was male, firm, clipped, and laced with urgency. For a split second, my heart forgot how to beat. He identified himself as Battalion Chief Lindsley from the out-of-state refinery response unit. His tone was not the robotic flatness of tragedy, but it wasn't casual either. My hand tightened around the phone so hard my fingers ached. He asked for me by name and confirmed I was listed in Lauren's medical emergency contacts. I couldn't breathe. I stood up slowly, the rooftop light behind me making my shadow stretch long across the concrete like a warning. Then he said the words, "She's alive, but there was an accident during the final sweep. She fell. A steel platform gave out. Internal injuries. We've stabilized her. She's asking for you." I don't remember grabbing my coat or locking the door or descending the building. I only remember the thundering panic, louder than the sirens of my past, louder than any emergency I'd ever faced in an engine bay or on a storm-struck tarmac. Because this wasn't machinery. This was Lauren. By the time I reached the regional medical center, she was already in surgery. I sat for hours in that sterile waiting room surrounded by the exhausted and the grieving, my hands folded tightly in my lap, eyes fixed on the automatic doors that never stopped opening and closing. I didn't cry, not yet. I couldn't afford the collapse. I just sat with one sentence on repeat in my head, "Please let her come back, please let her come back, please let her come back." When the surgeon finally entered the room, I stood before he even spoke. His eyes were kind but weary, the kind of eyes that had learned to carry both relief and sorrow with equal weight. "She made it through," he said. "It was close. The internal bleeding was extensive, but she's strong, stronger than most." When they let me in to see her, my chest broke open. Her body was still, her skin pale, IV lines and monitors clung to her like ghostly vines, but she was breathing, slowly, steadily. The same breath I had memorized on rooftops and couches and beside engines with oil on her palms. I took her hand in mine and sat there for the next 12 hours. I whispered every word I'd never said, every truth I had waited too long to name. I told her about the first time she looked at me and I forgot how to spell. I told her about the way she made the world feel loud again after years of quiet decay. I told her that I didn't want safe anymore, I wanted her. Bruised, burned, unpredictable, mine. When she woke, it was slow, like the rising of a tide rather than the flip of a switch. Her lips parted with a faint exhale and her eyes fluttered until they found mine. I leaned in before she could speak, my fingers trembling as I tucked her hair back from her forehead. "You scared the hell out of me," I whispered. She gave a ghost of a smile. "I'm getting good at that." I didn't laugh. I couldn't. I was still holding too much. "Don't do this again," I said, the plea so heavy in my chest I could barely push it out. "Don't make me live in a world where I have to guess if you'll come back." Her eyes filled, and for the first time she looked fragile, not because she was broken, but because she was trying to carry too much alone. "I've been asking myself if I can keep doing this job," she said softly. "If I can keep running into fire knowing it might leave you behind." She swallowed. "I don't want to lose myself, but I don't want to lose you either." "You don't have to choose," I said, pressing my forehead to hers. "We find a way to live in the middle, or we build something new." For days she recovered. Her team visited. Her captain brought flowers and quietly thanked me for being the one Lauren wanted beside her when things went dark. My daughter visited too. That surprised me. She stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, a bouquet in one hand and apology in her eyes. Lauren, ever gracious, nodded toward the chair and said, "Sit, we're not that fragile." And so we talked, about things that mattered, about things that didn't. About how love has a strange way of turning strangers into family faster than blood ever could. That night, Rebecca pulled me into the hallway and said, "I didn't understand before, but now I do. You're in love with her." I nodded. "And I'm proud of you," she added, voice thick, "for being brave enough to start over." When Lauren was discharged weeks later, I brought her home, not just to a room, but to my home. Our home. I cleared a drawer in my dresser. I made space in the closet. I built shelves in the garage for her gear. And one evening, as she stood watching me hang a second set of hooks for her jacket, she said quietly, "This feels terrifying, but good." "You've walked through explosions," I reminded her. "Yes," she said, stepping forward to wrap her arms around me. "But nothing ever felt this permanent." We sat on the couch that night wrapped in a blanket, the television muted, her hand resting over mine. There were no promises, no declarations, just the quiet decision to show up, every day, for each other. The seasons changed, slowly. Our routines became familiar: coffee in the morning, crossword clues at night, shared silence in between. I began introducing her to the few friends I still kept close. Most were surprised. A few were stunned. All of them eventually smiled, because love, real love, cannot be denied when it fills a room like morning light. One rainy Sunday, while we were rebuilding a carburetor in the garage, grease on both our hands, she looked up at me and said, "I want to take time off, not forever, just long enough to breathe, to build something with you that isn't made of ash and adrenaline." I stared at her, stunned. "Are you serious?" "As serious as smoke is heavy," she said with a grin. "I want to live, not just survive." And so we made a plan. A small coastal town, a rented cottage near an airfield where I could tinker with old planes and she could sleep without dreaming of alarms. We didn't run away. We just chose a different kind of life. One where fire wasn't the only thing that made us feel alive. One where love didn't come after grief, but instead of it. Months later, as we sat watching the sun dip into the ocean, Lauren reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny folded piece of paper. I opened it and laughed through tears when I saw it was a crossword clue. 7 letters, what we built when neither of us expected to. I wrote the answer in the sand beside us, forever. It's strange how love, once feared and unspoken, can become the most ordinary part of your day and the most sacred. It had been over a year since that first conversation at Gate 47, the storm that grounded every plane but somehow gave flight to something I didn't know I had been waiting for my whole life. A year since soot-streaked fingers pointed to a crossword clue and opened a doorway in my chest that had been sealed for too long. A year since her voice said, "Try me," and I did. And I kept trying every day after, and so did she. And we found something stronger than survival, a life rebuilt from breath and choice and a kind of trust we had both stopped believing in. Lauren never returned to her unit after the last accident. Not because she was too weak to continue, but because strength looks different after you've looked death in the face and come home to someone whose heartbeat became your anchor. We didn't call it retirement. We called it a shift, a redirection. She still trained new recruits once a month, still gave talks at the academy, still visited her old firehouse with a quiet reverence, like a veteran laying flowers on the graves of fallen comrades. But her days no longer began with alarms. They began with the soft click of the kettle in our kitchen, the crossword book resting on the counter, and the way her hand found mine in the quiet hush of early morning light. We had moved to the coast, a town with more seagulls than stoplights and a sky so wide it felt like a second chance every time you looked up. Our little cottage was nothing grand, but it breathed. Lauren built a garden in the back, all wildflowers and tomatoes, while I worked on vintage planes in the shed beside the porch. There were days she'd bring me lemonade in the middle of adjusting an old exhaust valve, her hands dirt-stained from pruning, her smile crooked from the sun. And I'd pause and look at her and think, this is it. This is what life should have felt like all along. One day, while we were unpacking a box that had remained unopened since the move, I found the old crossword book from the airport, the one that had started it all. Its pages were folded, corners stained, pen marks worn into the paper like permanent footprints. I handed it to her silently. She sat down on the floor and flipped to a page near the end. Blank squares stared back at us. "Want to finish it together?" she asked. I nodded. She read the first clue aloud. 10-letter word for a home made not of bricks but of moments. I smiled, us. We laughed, but she didn't write it down. Instead, she looked at me, eyes serious and soft all at once. "You know," she said quietly, "a year ago I didn't believe people like us got stories like this. Not at our age, not with our history." "I didn't either," I whispered. "But here we are." And there we were. That evening, Rebecca visited. She came more often now, usually with flowers from the city and stories about her students. She had started teaching literature at a local high school, a job that brought her both exhaustion and unexpected joy. She no longer asked how or why Lauren and I worked. She just accepted it, embraced it, even teased us about our synchronized tea preferences and heated debates over crossword grammar. But that night she was quieter. She lingered after dinner, helped wash dishes, and then followed us out to the porch where the sky turned purple above the horizon. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, "about how love doesn't always arrive in the form you expect." Lauren and I shared a glance but said nothing. "I used to think you were lonely by choice," she continued, her eyes fixed on the dark line where ocean met sky. "But now I see you were just waiting for the right kind of peace." I reached over and touched her hand. Sometimes peace looks like someone handing you noodles in a hanger and ruining your clean wrench set. Lauren chuckled beside me. "You loved it." "I tolerated it," I teased. Rebecca smiled. "I'm glad you didn't stop waiting, Mom." That night after she left, Lauren and I sat on the couch, the lights off, only the hum of the sea outside and the rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock filling the space. I leaned into her shoulder, my head resting against her collarbone. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. But after a long silence, she whispered something into the darkness that made me sit up, my heart lurching. "I've been thinking," she said, "about asking you something." I turned toward her. Not with pressure, not with tradition, just with hope. My breath caught. "I want to spend whatever time we have left building something permanent. Not because we need permission, but because I want to wake up every day knowing I chose you, out loud in front of the world." I didn't cry, I smiled, and I nodded slowly, deliberately. "Yes," I said. "Yes, Lauren, 1,000 times yes." We didn't have a big ceremony, just a gathering on the beach barefoot, surrounded by seagulls and the few people who mattered. I wore a soft blue dress. She wore a linen shirt with sleeves rolled up. The efficient read poetry instead of vows. And when we kissed beneath the sky that once witnessed our separate ache, the world exhaled around us. Later that evening, back in our home, I sat in the living room flipping through our guest book. Friends had scribbled notes in every margin, memories, jokes, quiet blessings, but one message made me pause. It was written in all caps, clearly printed, no flourish. It said, "Love isn't about age, it's about arrival. And you too, ARRIVED." I closed the book and walked into the kitchen, where Lauren was stirring tea and humming an old tune she probably didn't realize had become our song. I wrapped my arms around her from behind, resting my cheek against her back. "Do you think we arrived too late?" I asked softly. She turned in my arms, pulled me in closer and kissed my forehead. "No," she said, "I think we arrived just in time." And in that quiet kitchen, with the window open and the breeze carrying the scent of lavender and salt, I believed her. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories begin not in youth, but in the courage to start again, after the storms, after the silence, after years of playing safe. Sometimes, love shows up not when you're searching, but when you're finally still enough to be found. And sometimes, the person who asks you a simple question at gate 47 will go on to change your entire life, with fire in her soul, grease on her hands, and a crossword clue in her heart.